Hello friends, welcome. Today we will be talking about the various world models in economic geography. Before we start with the various world models, let's understand the world dynamics and why there was a need to devise the various models. Basically, it was Club of Rome in 1970s who commissioned the concept of predicament of mankind. What does basically that word mean or that phrase mean? So, to understand this predicament of mankind, Club of Rome explained that due to the exponentially growing population or exponentially increasing population, the various resources that we are having on the earth are in crisis, or we can say that there is a huge demand that has been put up on the earth's carrying capacity. What does the word carrying capacity here mean? Carrying capacity is basically if we have 200 people that a place can sustain. So that's the carrying capacity of that place. If we bring in 20,000 people there, that land will not be able to sustain that 20,000 people, and there would be huge demand on the carrying capacity. So due to the exponentially growing population of the world, what is happening? That the carrying capacity of the earth is put under huge pressure. So that was basically the concern that was led by a number of scientists at Club of Rome, and they gave the phrase predicament of mankind. So what they tried to start was, the first person was Forrester. J. Forrester was the first person in 1970s who gave the concept of uh, the World One. What was World One was basically based on the concept of system dynamics and related to world's socio-economic system. What does basically this means? This means that the concept of World One, which was propounded by Forrester, was mainly aimed to bring out an equal socio-economic system in the hierarchy. Okay, and that was the main aim which Forrester tried to address. When he on after his journey, when he returned to US, he suggested a modification of World One, which was the World Two model. Under World Two model, what he tried to do was, the World Two model was also known as World Dynamics. In this model, what he tried to explain was, he tried to map the interrelations between various variables, that's population, production, pollution. We would be discussing World 2 model in detail. And this, he said, there would be by 2100, there would be the collapse of mankind because all the resources would vanish off. So that was his concept. So Earth's carrying capacity would become very less. And what we need to do is, we need to identify alternatives or develop sustainable alternatives to develop sustainable future. So that was the main aim that was led by World 2. World 2 model was brought into modification as World 3 model by Daniel Meadows and Donna Meadows. They basically tried to explain the same concept that was propounded in World 1 and World 2 under the books named as Limits to Growth. They did not did huge modifications in the alternative concept that was propounded. So this was the basic concept, that due to sudden increase in population, the carrying capacity is under huge pressure. Limits to growth followed again the same concept. This was propounded by Meadows. Under this concept, they tried to explain the similar fundamental message but in a very much friendly style. That was a reason that World 3 model propounded by Meadows in Limits to Growth got worldwide popularity even among the non-technical people. Slowly and gradually, what happened in 1991, the three people who did the World 3 study redid the study again, and in 1991 they proposed the World 3-91 model, under which they gave again the same concept which was propounded in Limits to Growth and World Dynamics and System Dynamics, but this was under the name of Beyond the Limits. Under this, they tried to explain that for the 21st century, we are definitely under huge pressure due to population, but we need to propound a sustainable future, and for that sustainable future, they did a lot of computer simulation studies and brought in numerous numerical data. So numerical data was brought into, and that numerical data was the reason that Beyond the Limits got significantly varied from Limits to Growth and World Dynamics model. And under this, they also tried to contradict the criticism that was led into the Limits to Growth. So all the criticisms that were brought in by Limits to Growth were slowly and gradually tried to incorporate that and correct those in the Beyond the Limits model. So we have a series of models here. You have the World 1 model, then you have the World 2 or World Dynamics, then you have the World 3 or the Limits to Growth, and World 391, that's Beyond the Limits. Now we'll be understanding few of the major models here. So that's the World 2 model, the World 3 model, and the World Integrated model. That's kind of separate model from this one. So let's start first with the World 2 model. As we can see, the World 2 model was given by Forrester. So in this, this is the next model we will be discussing. So you have the World 2 model. Under the World 2 model, we can see here is the World 2 model. So World 2 model propounded by Forrester and Meadows considered 5 variables. So these 5 variables were population, pollution, per capita food available, per capita industrial output, and natural resources. Based on these 5 parameters or 5 variables, they try to identify policies that can move global system into a highly sustainable future system. So here they gave the concept of run. So what was the concept of run? Run is the simulation of model with variables that are changing in a particular way. So it's basically kind of simulation of model with variables that are changing in particular way. Okay, so that is what is explained as run. So he devised 7 runs. The first run, he said, there is an exponential growth. Because the population is growing exponentially, there is depletion of resources. This is leading to collapse of the socio-economic systems. So we need to take urgent steps. In second run, he said the technology is growing. Because of growing technology, resource availability is doubling. And also what is happening is there is high industrial output which is increasing the pollution levels. At the third phase, he said that he previously said that technology would increase the resource availability, but in this third phase, he said that technology will cut the resources to 1/4 of the present level, because we would be harnessing so much that the resource would cut to 1/4 of the present level. In the fourth run, he explained or talked about technological solutions for pollution. He tried to discover the concept of nuclear energy and focused on the concept of recycling or reusing the waste. The fifth run, he talked about the land. He said that land yield will double with development. So as and when the development will increase, the land yield will increase. So So we'll have more food for the people and we can sustain more of population. In the sixth run, he talked about voluntary birth control. He said that we cannot halt the population growth, but we can postpone the food crisis. So if we are controlling our population, we cannot control the population growth that is going on, but we can have food for more people, and in this manner we can postpone the food crisis which would be occurring today to sometime later period. And finally, in the seventh run, he said there would be land overuse, there would be high shortage of food, resources would be depleted, there would be pollution, which would lead to food crisis. Once there is food crisis, what would happen? The death rate would increase, and again there would be a technological slowdown. So there would be a decrease in the level of technology. So these were the 7 runs that Meadows explained in the World 2 model. The implications of the World 2 model are very clear. He basically tried to say that growth is limited by nature. So you have growth which would be limited by nature. You cannot grow beyond what nature can give you. There is interdependency between these 5 variables. So these were the things he tried to focus on, and finally he emphasized on the socio-economic setup. So you have the socio-economic implications that were involved with these concepts. There were a lot of criticism on the World 2 model. Some of the basic criticism were it considered whole world as one unit, which is not the case. There was system within the subsystem, which is not the reality. There was incorrect prediction of the phenomena. He tried to extrapolate a lot of physical parameters, which is not the reality. And his model, which was based on system dynamics or world dynamics, was a kind of oversimplification of reality. He tried to simplify reality in this terms that due to high population, there is a crisis, and that crisis would lead to collapse of the earth. So these were the major criticisms of the World 2 model. Now we'll move on to the next model, that is the World 3 model or limits to growth. So limits to growth model was propounded in 1972 by Donella Meadows, Dennis Meadows, Jorgen Randers, and William Behrens. It's also known as J. Forrester's. It's based on J. Forrester's World 2 model and is also known as World 3 model. These were the 5 parameters that were considered, 5 variables, which were similar to World 2 model. That's the population, pollution, food production, resource depletion, and industrialization. He said all these 5 variables can either increase, can decrease, remain constant, oscillate, or combine. So these were the 5 things that can happen with all of these 5 variables as the time progresses. So that was the first concept that was laid by the World 3 model. Then he also said that the pollution, population, capital, and these variables try to increase with time. So we have 1990s here or 1900s here, and you have 21,000 here. So you have these variables as increasing, and at this point of time we can say there would be the end of world, or the world would run out of the resources. And the next important thing that this model limits to growth tried to did was it tried to accurately predict the time when we will run out of the resources. So it tried to predict the time for various resources. How was this calculated? Let's go into that. Let's say in 1972 we have 775 million metric reserves for chromium. Okay, and every year we are mining 1.85 metric tons. So he said that if we try to find out the static index, it's very simple. 775 divided by 1.85. So we can say that chromium, if mined every year at 1.85 million metric tons, would last for 418 years. So 418 years would be the time period for which the chromium would last. But in limits to growth, what happens is we are increasing the rate of using the resource. So say in 1972, we were using 1.85 million metric tons. In 1973, we would be using 1.92. Then in 1974, we would be say using 1.98. Then 1975, we would be using 2.00. So what's happening? We are increasing our use of that resource. So if we are increasing the use of the resource, here is the formula to calculate how many years the resource would last. So the formula is y is equal to log of 1 minus g into r by c, where g is the rate of growth of consumption. So we say if the rate of growth of consumption is 2.6% annually, so we can take this component as 0.026 and multiply it with the reserve capacity, that is 775, and the current consumption, that is 1.85. So the calculation would be y is equal to log of 1 minus 0.026 into 775 divided by 1.85 divided by log of 1 plus 0.026 minus 1. So this would be the complete formula that we would be applying to calculate how many years this chromium would last. So if we say we are using a static calculation, it lasts for 418 years. If we are using an increasing rate of resource consumption, we can say that this static index would decrease to say 386. So from 418 years, when the chromium would be finishing off, we can say this would decrease to 386. So all these studies were done by computers on what was known as simulation models, and these models try to explain how much years will each resource like chromium, zinc, gold would vanish off. So they gave basically time frames in which these resources would slowly and gradually run out. So this was the limits to growth model. As we said, this was given in a very friendly and simple manner. Because of its simplicity, it gained huge popularity across the world. And this was the reason it became one of the most popular models in economic geography, that was limits to growth. We already talked about beyond the limits. That was a modification again given by these people in 1991. There is a different model that we would be talking about today. That's the world integrated model. So world integrated model was again derived from Peston and Meserovic. This model was mentioned in the book known as Mankind at the Turning Point. The basic element of this model was it divided the world into 10 regions with submodels for each region, and the basic assumption was that the rich nation is providing economic aid to the poor nation. That was the whole and sole concept of this model. This was again considered as one of the very comprehensive models of integrated global systems, where they considered the following parameters. The parameters were agriculture, fishery, energy, macroeconomics. You have the national income, GDP, GNP. So that's all covered under macroeconomics. You have natural resource usage, population, the trade, investment in a region. You have foreign aid, and finally the level of carbon dioxide emission or the greenhouse gases, we can say in broad terms. So these were the parameters that the world integrated model considered. Under this consideration, there was what was basically the results that were laid out by the world integrated model, or called as WIM model. Under the WIM model, they said before 2000, food supply would collapse. That is already gone, so it's no more applicable. According to this model, they said before 2000, the food supply will collapse. That would lead to decrease in population. So this decrease in population would also try to prevent the global cooperation among the various regions, and If rich nations are delaying economic aid to the poor nation, there would be hard to find solutions to the world problem. So it's very simple as that. Let's take a recent example of Ebola virus. What's happening is Ebola virus is getting prevalent in the countries, in the underdeveloped countries of Africa, that's Syria, Lebanon, Liberia. So what's happening? They are looking for aid from rich countries. If the rich countries do not provide adequate aid to the poor nations in Central Africa and Southern Africa, what would happen is there is very hard, it would become very hard or difficult to find solution to the problem of Ebola virus in the developing or underdeveloped nations, less developed nations of Africa. So this was the major result that was laid under the World Integrated Model. Now, World Integrated Model was criticized on numerous parameters. The basic criticism was they are aiming at economic aid or financial aid, which is not always the case because that is not the only parameter which would govern the development of a region. We cannot say a poor nation would develop only if it gets financial aid. So that was the first criticism. Second was it was highly optimistic about technology. So much optimism about technology is also incorrect because it's not always the case that technology would simplify and make things easier for future generations. This model overemphasized the prosperous nations. It said only the rich can lead to development of the poor. But there is a case that's vice versa because rich countries are always being supplied by labor and raw material from the poor nations. So it's not always the case that only if rich prosperous, the world will prosperous. It tried to oversimplify the model. There was no obstacle in political realization. Okay, there was again this model did not aim at technical limitations. Despite we know the fact there are a lot of technical limitations, this model did not consider this parameter as a limiting factor. Again, it did not try to limit the reason for exhaustible resources. So that was again the reason this model was criticized. So we have understood the major three models today. That's the World 2 model, World 3 model, and the World Integrated model. We have understood why there was a wave which led to origin of the world models, the concept of world dynamics, and the flowchart by which we understood the sequence of development of various models. Hope you enjoyed this class. In next session tomorrow, we will be talking about the theories of economic development. We will be talking about the Rostow's theory mainly. So stay tuned for the further sessions. Have a good day.